joining us for today's panel. We are going to be discussing the critical role of cities in achieving net zero. Just a couple of facts to start this off. 55% of the world's population, so it's 4.2 billion people, live in cities. And in 2050, that number is going to be 7 in 10. If you look at the GDP, 80% of the global GDP happens in cities. If you look at the difference in GDP between what happens in a city versus what happens in rural areas, India being an example, the ratio is literally 2 to 1. So this pressure you're going to see for urbanization is quite inexorable. And if we cannot get cities to be net zero, we will not be net zero. Now, I'm the CEO of Reckitt. My name is Lakshman Narasimhan. The Humber side, which is where Reckitt is based with its core operations, is about a quarter of the emissions in the UK. So if you can't get the Humber side to be net zero, the UK will not be net zero. What we've done here is we've put together a terrific panel of government leaders, business leaders, and some very inspirational city leaders who are all going to talk a little bit about their perspectives on the issue. And just to start off, I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we'll move on from there. So we've got Andrew Griffith, who is the MP and a net zero business champion. We have the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone, Yvonne Aki-Sawyer. We have the chancellor of the University of Hull, Baroness Virginia Bottomsley. We have the mayor of Seattle as well, Mayor Jenny Durkan. We've got the Director General of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industries, Tony Danker. And we have the Global Chairman and CEO of Ernst & Young, or EY, which is Carmine de Sibio. So it's a terrific group. But what I'm going to do is just for the opening comments, I'm going to call on the MP, Andrew Griffith, here to give us his perspectives. Andrew?
Thank you so much. I'll stay sitting down, otherwise we'll all bob up and down. But first of all, thank you to Laxman and Reckitt for putting together such a brilliant panel. If we can't solve the problem of net zero in cities this afternoon, nobody can. And for your support for the COP26 Climate Summit. Business is at the heart of climate action like never before. Over half of the largest companies have already pledged to science-based targets. And it's by harnessing that problem-solving capacity that actually we're going to solve this. So we need global leadership here today, this week, but we also need brilliant organizations such as Reckitt itself. A couple of very brief words. This is a revolution. The Prime Minister rightly calls it the Green Industrial Revolution. And our cities, of course, were forged from the first Industrial Revolution, the artifacts of which can still be found around the world today. So we should think about this as an area of great opportunity. The second point is that the cities are at the heart of the adaptation and resilience agenda. Cities are not themselves self-sustaining. They rely on their hinterland. When we look at the global coming battles for water, and the shortage of clean water and the vast amount of energy that is consumed in producing it. Cities themselves are very rarely self-sufficient in food and water and natural resources. So they're at the heart of that agenda. And if we don't get our answers right for the cities, then we're not going to be able to get our answers right for the rest. And third and finally, cities historically are the crucible. The Prime Minister calls them the cyclotron of innovation, bringing diverse populations together, fonts of innovation, producing solutions, connecting capital with people and ideas. And so they really are the heart. So you're to be commended for choosing this topic. And if we can get the cities right, and post-pandemic, we do have some opportunities and some challenges to reinvent our cities, particularly in the most developed West, then we have the most wonderful chance to create brilliant places to live, to work, but also to deliver productively for society.
Terrific. And I just one small follow-up question, if I could. At the heart of this is collaboration. Are you seeing in your role that as companies come to you with what they want to do with net zero, are you seeing them take an expansive view as to partnerships and collaborations?
Absolutely. Businesses, science and innovation, like never before. I mean, remember, we are sitting here today as a result of that wonderful collaboration between governments, state actors in terms of public health bodies, innovation and science, private risk capital, and entrepreneurship and the capability of big organizations. So the answer, yeah, Laxmi, is yes. We're absolutely seeing that. And we've got to hold on to that, right? We've got to hold on. I mean, government is not easy. I suspect anywhere in the world we don't find government easy. We can be too horizontal, too siloed, not collaborative enough. But all of the big challenges we face in society, and cities is one, but we know there are many others, require governments to collaborate horizontally, and they're best done with third parties.
Terrific. Well, let me go to the mayor, Yvonne Aki-Sawyer. You're an inspiring leader, and you lead a very important city for the city of Hull. We've had a great sisterhood or partnership between the two cities. Any thoughts from you on this particular topic about the role of cities in achieving net zero?
Thank you very much. And as you say, we've had a 42-year-old twinning relationship with Hull, which has been very beneficial to both sides. But coming on to the role of cities, I'm looking at the image on the wall there, achieving net zero, critical role of cities. And I think I want to start off by saying not all cities look like that. And that's a very important piece in this. As we talk about climate change and how we're approaching this, there has to be a realization and appreciation of the diversity of human existence and the diversity of cities. Cities all have an important role to play, but it's going to be different. Cities like that, in that image, mitigation, reduction of carbon emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions are going to be critical because that's where the industrialization is, but that doesn't mean that other cities don't have a role to play. How do we see this happening? In Freetown, on the continent as a whole, I had a bit of a debate on this with someone yesterday. The data I see says it's 0.55% of carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions come from the continent of Africa. He was arguing there was 4%. 4%, 0.55%, take it or leave it, we're still very small. So where does that leave us, and what is it that we are doing? Now, the issues of climate affect standards of living, they affect health, they affect air quality. So it's still an issue, even if you're not an emitter. But more significantly, the consequences of climate change are being felt very strongly, very real, every day in cities that are not emitters, on the continents that are not big emitters. So what can we do and what are we doing? In Freetown, I'll just highlight 3 areas. And I feel that these are things which are scalable and can be replicated in other cities because we all have a role to play. We are increasing the carbon sink that's our bid towards the mitigation, but really it's also about adaptation because of the floods. So we are planting 1 million trees, Freetown the Tree Town, #, which we launched in January 2020, and to date we have planted 550,000 trees. And we've got 450,000 more to go, and funding applications are out on that, but funding has come from a range of sources. There's been Jeff funding, there's been World Bank funding, there's been diaspora, there's been ordinary Freetonians, and there's also now an impact investing model that we've developed, impact tokens. So we work on a platform which is both retail and wholesale. You can buy a clothing, we partner with a clothing designer of Sierra Leonean, Finor X. You buy a t-shirt, you buy a hat, a percentage of that goes to one of the trees that's already in the ground, plus planting another. I also want to say very quickly, because I know time is not on our side, that we're not just about planting trees, we're about growing them. So every tree is digitally identified. It's got a unique identifying number. It's tracked in an app. We have created jobs through this. So we have community-based organizations who are growers. It's their job to track the trees, but any Freetonian can be a tree steward. So you can plant a tree. It will be tracked by a grower. They get paid on a monthly basis based on the monitoring of that tree, which we see in the database, and they get paid through mobile money. So that's us both adapting because the heavy rains are leading to floods and landslides. Therefore, we're planting along the hillsides. We're planting in the mangroves, restoring biodiversity, and bringing back fish populations. So that's our contribution from that angle. But beyond that, air quality is affected in the same way that you have the congestion charge, it's seeking to bring down the emissions from vehicles. We don't have the luxury, we don't have the ability to really have a congestion charge right now. But what we do have is an opportunity to bring in mass transit. And some people will say, why mass transit? Because it's definitely more green than the low occupancy, heavy fuel emitting or fuel utilizing vehicles that we have. So we're building we are seeking, and this is where the private sector comes in. We are seeking to establish.
Give them the hashtag.
No, this one isn't a hashtag, but I can put a hashtag if you want. Hashtag cable car. So we're seeking to introduce a cable car system which will link communities. It will reduce transport time. It will increase productivity because what would take 2.5 hours will now take 20 minutes. But the challenge with climate, as cities seek to play this role, and I'm sure Jenny will say more about this, as cities seek to play this role, the challenge is where is the finance coming from? And how is it getting to cities when we sometimes have obstacles through our national governments? Accessing finance, and it's not just about accessing private finance, even grant financing. It has taken us 2 years to get to a point of having an application go through now for feasibility money, feasibility study money for this cable car, which will have a dramatic impact. Transport accounts for 28% of our fuel emissions. So in short, I think what I'm saying is the rubber hits the road in the cities. That's where the impact of climate is felt. And that's where the solutions are. Of course, we're not saying nation states are not important, Minister. They're hugely important. Advisor to the Prime Minister. We understand and appreciate the very significant roles of nation states. But I think perhaps enough is not being made of the role of cities. The fact that we're close to the people, we can be nimble, we can be fast, we can be adaptive and responsive, but we have obstacles. One of the key ones is access to finance, particularly in the global south. Another one sometimes is our national governments. I'm not saying that's the case in the UK, but it's certainly a challenge that I'm experiencing. So I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity. I'd like to thank you for the partnership with Hull and with Reckitt, and I wish you all a good discussion as we continue to talk about the great jobs the cities can do. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mayor Sawyer, who I know is leaving to go to another commitment. But I thought maybe what we would do is go from the south to Seattle. And so just over to Mayor Durkin. Obviously, this is a topic that's very close to you, just having spoken to you earlier, around some of the things that you're working on. I think there's some similarities, are there not?
It is, and I want to say that I think that the role of cities is critical, and I'm a vice chair of the C40 mayors. Over the last year, I think we've seen the blueprint of what urgency, global urgency looks like, and that was the pandemic. And we saw what worked, and I think cities led the way. But we also saw the pitfalls, which was the same kind of things we're seeing with the global south, not getting vaccinations, not getting testing. The same regions in the globe or in the cities that bear the burden of climate injustice are the same ones that bear the burden of the pandemic. And so we saw us act as a globe with urgency. And in Seattle, we have some advantages. One, our city does look more like that. Which is also, though, a disadvantage because there can be other obstacles. First, we have one great advantage. We own our electric utility. We own and operate several hydroelectric dams. Our grid is 100% green. And so we are pushing very hard in two areas because most of our greenhouse gases either come from transportation or from our buildings. So in transportation, a three-prong approach. Number one, get people out of vehicles. Make it as easy as possible for people not to have to get in a car. And that means spaces to walk, roll, and bike, but it also means mass transit of every kind. And also transit-oriented development so that if you have build density, you make it easy for people to have transportation. I'll tell you a little bit more about what we've done on that front, including free transit now for everyone between 12 and 18. To culturate people to get on transit, to do those things, but also to electrify as much as we can. We're moving to electrify vehicles. We put in place all new construction of certain types, residential and commercial, has to include charging stations so that we harness development itself to build that, and also we have our own utility. So in transportation, we're really focused on getting people out of cars and then having as much transit. We've invested billions in the region for light rail and buses because we know that works. On buildings, it's harder. And we've talked about, new buildings, you can put the codes in place. But for existing buildings, which are such a huge percentage, we are going to lead the way where we are going to make sure our buildings, the city operates, are carbon neutral by a certain date. But I had an executive order yesterday to also decarbonize all existing buildings by 2035. And so putting that in place, now the main obstacle is financing. That's a similar theme wherever you are in the globe. How do you make sure that the national governments, together with private industry, can come together? And we have a great, I know we're not supposed to be advertising stuff from competitors, but Climate Pledge Arena, a new arena that I cut the ribbon on just last week in Seattle. It is the first net zero arena in the country. And it's fantastic, but working together with private industry who not a penny of taxpayer dollars went into building that, but they were very committed to show it could be done and could be done at scale. So I think cities, I'll be quiet because I know everyone wants to talk, but I want to also say to the minister, nation states play a role, but we mayors see those kind of as the big freighters in the ocean. And we are the fast boats. And we have to build the synergies. And we saw that in the last year, and particularly in America, where our national government was hostile to climate change for a period of time, we had to have mayors fill that gap. And working globally together, we're very happy to see Sadiq Khan take over the C40 mayors and provide that kind of impetus for us. I think we have a lot to look forward to because the crisis is so real.
That's terrific. That was cities. I'm just going to go to business if I could and get the business. Get the business perspective. Tony, perhaps I'll come to you first. Come back to the UK for a moment. The CBI has a huge role to play. It is a business-driven movement, and I think what you're really doing is trying to convene, collaborate, and communicate with the folks around net zero. How is it taking shape in your view?
Yeah,
is business responding?
Yeah, well, look, I think this started for us actually not through the lens of net zero, but it started in a conversation I had with the Prime Minister back in March around his levelling up agenda. If you're not from the UK, Britain is a pretty extreme example of deep regional inequality between a city like London, which is hugely competitive, hugely productive, genuinely global leading city, and other cities in the UK which really struggle with productivity. And we were problem solving together about how are we going to bring higher value industries, higher value sectors, higher value skills, and higher value jobs to cities and towns outside London, outside the flagship cities. And what we stumbled upon, of course, was not that achieving net zero critical role of cities, but achieving net zero critical opportunity of cities and city regions, all of which, by the way, do not exist in the same places that necessarily the cities of the Industrial Revolution have succeeded. And that's where Hull is particularly interesting, right? Hull is a city that sits on the Humber, which already is in offshore wind and has the potential in hydrogen and carbon capture to be a genuinely world-class destination for this new green economy. And all of a sudden, therefore, you start to think, hey, we can kill two birds with one stone here, which is probably a terrible metaphor, but you know what I mean, right? We can actually generate huge economic opportunity for cities beyond the sort of world-leading cities already, using net zero opportunity. And these places can become genuinely green regeneration stories. And that's where I think the agenda for cities and the agenda for net zero comes together. This second industrial revolution, to use Andrew's phrase, doesn't have to be based in London or New York or in San Francisco, and also probably Seattle, but you'll tell me. I don't want to demean you, but nor do I want to attribute to you value that you don't want to claim. But there is a real potential, I think, for new cities and new towns and new regions of our countries to benefit from a green industrial revolution in a way that I think is different to what's come before.
So is that core to your economic cluster plans? And how is that coming together?
Yeah, look, I think those of you that follow the literature on economic clusters, the UK hasn't been so good, I think, at fostering the economic clusters that, say, you have in Seattle or you have in Silicon Valley or in the Massachusetts health cluster, and that's just the US ones. Other countries have got them too. And I think what we failed to deliver, looking at the words partnerships and support, we failed to really put together the private sector with government and people like what Virginia does at the University of Hull together in a place to say, what would it mean to really collaborate in making this place not just good for Britain, but genuinely world-class cluster of net zero expertise that in turn powers better jobs, better skills, and better economic regeneration for a place.
Great. You just mentioned the private sector. Carmine, in your role, you're obviously advising the leading companies of the world. What's your take? How is net zero really impacting businesses? And are you seeing them really open their eyes up to this notion of collaboration and collective action?
Laxman, thanks, and thanks for having me here. I think if this was 3 years ago, I wouldn't be on this panel, and so it is. The short answer to your question is absolutely. Business has woken up to the importance of climate and climate change. The U.S. business has opened up to the importance of climate and climate change. I would say it's almost like a switch went off in the U.S. a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, in terms of the importance. And it's we at EY, we obviously work with cities, and we work with cities in terms of helping cities. We have a whole smart city solution where we help cities digitize themselves, but we also help cities become more green and become more sustainable, whether that's buildings, whether that's water usage, whether that's obviously electricity usage. So we do a lot of work with cities, but then probably our biggest role, Laxman, is to provide that collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. And we do advise a lot of the private sector, and I will tell you, to the investment question, there are more investment dollars looking to go into these projects than there ever have been, trillions of dollars. I think that spigot is opening and opening up more and more. I'm actually here as also as part of a delegation with a delegation from Papua New Guinea, which we're helping them raise a $10 billion fund to help invest in the rainforests and in really into what they're doing, into the carbon sinks. And so this is an area that I think is just starting and has so much potential, and it has so much potential because of the collaboration and because the private sector is totally in. And in fact, I was having a conversation around the private sector buying offsets, and there's been so much controversy in terms of the private sector buying offsets. And one of the things I said to some of the people I was talking to is, please do not discourage the private sector from buying offsets. Some of the press wants to do that. They say all offsets are bad, and they don't, they're not part of the Paris Accord accounting and so forth. And we have to solve that, no doubt about it. But don't discourage the private sector from investing and buying offsets. I think that's important. So, short answer is absolutely. Private sector's all in to help. We're at EY, really becoming a facilitator between the public sector and the private sector, and we're happy to be that.
Before I go to universities, Tony mentioned economic clusters. I'm just going to direct this question to you, and Tony, you might want to follow up. One of the biggest things we have to do is create jobs, but really jobs in the new environment. Do you believe that there's enough visibility, there's enough interaction between business and cities around this job creation question?
I think it's the...
Actually, I'll come to you, Virginia, after I just want Carmine to then...
Yeah, so I think creating jobs is incredibly important, and we need to upskill all our people in terms of jobs, and a lot of that's around technology, a lot of that's around sustainability. In our profession, one of the things that I've been talking to a lot of universities about is, combining, obviously we hire a lot of accountants and a lot of accounting majors, and I've been talking about to universities on combining an accounting degree with a sustainability degree, and having either two dual degrees or a major and a minor. And I've started this with a few universities that I'm familiar with, and they've socialized it with the faculty, they've socialized it with the kids, and they said that they're seeing a huge increase in interest in accounting because of the sustainability part of it. And I tell everyone, our people are going to have to be able to account for and audit, euros, pounds, dollars, and carbon.
That's a really good point. I think you're getting a lot of body language that's sympathetic to what you said from the University of Hull. So to that end, what I might do is, just move to Barbara Virginia Bottomley, who was Chancellor of the University of Hull. But interestingly, before that, she was a minister. She's Minister of Health, of Culture, of Transportation. I just wondered whether you might want to take this on and say, what is the role of universities really in sponsoring
Well,
innovation.
it's an absolutely joyous conversation. I just do have to point out that my first ministerial job was as an environment minister.
Environment.
And we saved the ozone layer with Margaret Thatcher. And we opened up central Westminster. And this was, she'd fought the Falkland Islands, she'd fought the Union, she'd fought about council houses, and now she was getting her teeth into the environment. And it was a brilliant campaign. And why did she love it? Because all the science at the British Antarctic Survey had been done by British scientists. So she thought this was particularly good. And then they had the Montreal Protocol, a global movement. There was a tremendous campaign to get industry to get rid of their CFCs. And, of course, a great mass population campaign to get young people engaged, all said to their parents, I hope you're not using propellant deodorants and all this sort of stuff. I just tell you this because it's a tiny microcosm of what we're now seeing on a sort of major scale. It's very nice to people of you here who remember it. Now, what you have to have, of course, is good science. You must have a scientific base. And you've heard that Hull, an old industrial city, with 25% of the carbon in the UK comes from the region. It's the most flood-endangered estuary in the country after London, so hugely vulnerable. And they made the choice that they were going to really get into environment and energy. And they wisely appointed this man here, Professor Dan Parsons. Please have your book up for a consultation later on, because he is brilliant. And there's nothing he doesn't know about floods and flood resilience. And all these countries around the world, Sierra Leone and so on, come back and consult. But of course then, you had this wonderful opportunity of the Siemens factory in 2016, opening this huge wind farm. The Queen came to visit at the City of Culture and to see the blade factory. It was glorious. The City of Culture made people feel energized, engaged. There's a little bit of sense at Hull that people can feel passive, you know. Not enough get up and go. And now, with the government and with the CBI and other people endorsing what's happening, so nobody can do it alone. Nobody can do it alone. But now you've got this massive hydrogen investment, the carbon capture investment. Hooray for the CBI and the economic cluster. We're definitely going to be the Silicon Valley of renewables. And so much else. And the university, what's the university doing? Really seriously on training skills, PhDs, masters in renewable energy and carbon capture, so on and so forth. I met a whole team of them at the House of Parliament last week. Really exciting, and so much more to be done, collaborating with Hull City. We're really lucky that there's only one major university, because otherwise if you have different universities, they're slightly at 6s and 7s. But this has been a great story, and it's good for the university because it gives it a distinct message. People want to go to a university where you're saving the planet. It's wonderful for business. We want you there. It's wonderful for business. And celebrate Laxman. What did the Prince of Wales say? It's all up to the private sector. And he's been saying that for a long, long time. So this is a joyful event, and certainly at Hull, and I'm sure other universities around the planet. We've got every reason to collaborate and contribute, not just to be an ivory tower on our own, but roll our sleeves out, create the research, the investment, the evaluation, the solutions of tomorrow, and train the people who can actually do those green jobs.
What I'd like to then do, thank you for that, I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the bottlenecks and get different perspectives. Maybe we'll start with cities first. And Durkan, just wondering whether you could talk a bit about what bottlenecks do you see that stop us making this happen?
So I think there's two bottlenecks, and I just want to echo, I think the universities play such a critical role, and you see the synergies here. Just take a little diversion. I think what we're seeing is good climate policy is good economic policy. And in fact, if you want long-term good economic policy, it has to be good for the climate because there is no other solution. And so we're driving for we're a town of pretty small mom and pop companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Starbucks. But those companies realized and recognized really early that not only did they need to start what they had to do for their employees, but their long-term interest was in doing this. And so partnering with them has been critical because government can't scale alone. And we see the greatest obstacles right now are costs. They're different than the obstacles that my friend Yvonne has, but still, if you want to take a lot of buildings and retrofit them so they're carbon neutral in a city that are the built environment, it's much more challenging. And so we've got the technology. We can train the new people. We offer 2 years free college for every high school student from Seattle. And now we're building apprenticeship programs at our universities and colleges in green new jobs. both the innovation and technology. So I think having these things together, private industry together with that, is the solution, but the obstacles really is not the science, not that people don't believe it. It really is, how do we get from here to there in a way that works?
I'm going to come to Andrew in just one moment, but before I do that, a question for the business folks. What bottlenecks do you see? Maybe, Tony, you want to go first?
Yeah, look, I think, so I completely agree with Carmine that the level of commitment now from businesses of an altogether different order, right? You would not have seen, the difference between this COP and previous COPs is we have global CEOs by the dozen. And that should tell you, by the way, that this is not about greenwashing. This is about genuine economic opportunity. In my experience, Lakshman, CEOs don't show up for greenwashing. They show up for genuine growth opportunities. So I think you've got a high level of commitment now from the private sector. I think one of the big bottlenecks is going to be just developing the next iteration of the business-government relationship to unlock the investment. Because the other thing we've got, as you've talked about, is money. So we have commitment and we have money. What we don't yet have, in my view, is effective markets in two ways. We don't necessarily have effective market-making mechanisms for renewable energy in particular. And the whole story of the offshore wind success market in the UK is about government underwriting that market. It's not necessarily about a whole ton of public subsidy. It's about playing the guarantor and the market maker for investment to come in. And the second thing is probably skills, which takes us back to universities, where we don't yet have, I think, a sophisticated and rapid enough skills system that where supply and demand are connected when it comes to the green economy. I don't think we yet really know what green jobs and green skills we really need, and nor do we yet know, therefore, how universities and colleges can adopt their business model fast enough to generate those skills quickly. So I actually think the major bottleneck, it's less a bottleneck and it's more a new paradigm, is how government and business work together, not just to subsidize or regulate, but to unlock new green markets and to provide new green skills.
So, Carmine, before I go to Andrew, anyone add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree on markets, in particular carbon market, if we're talking more general. I do think also governments have to work together in terms of developing that, and that's something that's going to be important going forward. So I totally agree with that. And then, the other part of this is standards. Today, there are very few standards, whether that's how companies report, whether that's how we actually count carbon, I mentioned the offsets before. We have to have better standards, and government's going to have to help with standards as we go forward. I think those are the two macro things that are getting in the way of us moving faster.
Andrew, you've heard a lot of input. You've heard comments from certainly business, but also from cities as well as some universities. Any reflections, just both in terms of both the opportunity as well as addressing maybe potentially some of these bottlenecks from your perspective?
Yeah, look, reflections, they're right, okay? So I think the problem statement is well understood. And I would add and amplify in terms of skills. The rate of change is happening so fast. This is an exponential rate of change, and most of our responses so far are still quite linear. So that is the problem statement. All of the technologies, this is a little bit bullish, but not too much. All of the technologies to achieve what we want, low carbon living, are already out there, but they're not deployed at scale. And that's what we're really talking about, is the capability to scale them. There's a brilliant vision for cities I hear again and again. We're going to have vertical farms and electric vehicles and smart grids, hydrogen boats whizzing around. I mean, yes, where do we sign? Zero carbon in use as well as zero carbon in construction built environment. But there's an awful lot of legacy, and that legacy is the friction from where we are here to there. So the answer, of course, is to mobilize capital, smartly, but we've got to do that with the private sector. There's not going to be a check that any government can write anywhere in the world that's going to achieve our goals, and nor should it. So we've got to be able to mobilize private capital. That's to the point about data. It is at heart. All of these problems we're wrestling with are data optimization problems, resource optimization problems, but we don't have the data fully instrumented to do that. There is a quiet revolution called carbon financial disclosures that the UK has been the first country in the G20 to mandate You know, your brilliant company will be going through the process of trying to fully understand its supply chain, documented in atoms of carbon rather
I have my
than
supply chain leader
all
here,
those-
by the way, listening to you. So.
Well, you know that this is going to work when the supply chain leader is fully engaged, with respect to when it moves out of the corner office and when it starts to go into the head of procurement and the head of supply chain and the head of operations. This revolution is going to be conquered. And then finally, look, the role of government. Government needs to be more agile, right? If we talk about skills, Tony and I have talked about this a lot. We need to find new ways that government can respond to this really rapid pace of growth. Be much more connected, be less siloed, potentially, and maybe a particular UK challenge, be more open in terms of the way in which we work with business leaders. Right. I mean, we're all going to come back to the same hackneyed examples, but the way we put together task forces to deal with the pandemic, you know, let's hold on to that, right? Let's try and reconcile the needs for accountability in the democratic institutions that we have. We know that's important, but also why can't we mobilize brilliant scientists and leaders and business folk aimed at a particular set of tasks and not use the same old legacy architecture and ways of working? Let's see. Work in progress, but let's see what we can do.
It's a great segue, by the great points. I want to talk about leadership, which is really at the heart of this. I speak as a leader of a company, and I know that as we get into this new world of working, where this is actually central to what a company does, and the sense of place becomes really important, leadership becomes a big deal. And particularly for someone like me, or whoever's going to succeed me, or my leadership team, they have to have the ability to work in the public sector, the private sector, and the social sector, all three together. But I know, speaking to the councillor from Sierra Leone, that leadership in cities is a big deal. I come from a town called Pune, which has one urban planner with, 8 million people. That's a remarkable number. Mayor Durkan, question to you. Leadership in cities, how is it being challenged by what you see coming?
I think it's being challenged across the board because cities are the first line of defense and so proximate to everything that happens. In Seattle, we have a very temperate climate, not unlike London's. But last summer we had over a week where there was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. Never has happened in the history of the city. Only about a third of our houses have air conditioning. About a week, a month, sometimes more in the summer, we have choking smoke from the fires that are raging, where our air quality is worse than Beijing's. And so the immediate impacts are there, and those impacts gives us the ability to lead. But you have to, I think we've spent so much time in the last 10 years convincing ourselves there was a problem, that now we've got to solve that problem because that time has run out. And I think that having that sense of urgency in leadership is the critical thing, and then knowing how to connect with the people. There's no more ors. It's all ands. It's not just regulation or incentives. It's got to be both. We have to take every tool in the toolbox that government has and show that we can lead not just as city leaders, but how do we lead in that collaborations that are going to be critical to do this.
And do you believe there's enough in place, capacity building wise, to get that leadership to show up?
I think there is. I think that the thing that is important about COP26, again, is you've seen more people respond to this.
Yes.
So the cognizance is there, and it's up to us to make it real and to not settle for half measures, because half measures will kill the planet.
From a business perspective, Carmine and then Tony, what are your thoughts on the leadership question?
Well, Laxman, first of all, when we talk about leadership, in particular in this, people like you and I, the leaders are going to be the future generations. So we have 312,000 people at EY. Our average age is 27 and a half years old. We have Gen Zers that are coming up, and Gen Zers know more about this topic than, baby boomers or Gen X's or whatever it is. And I think Gen Alpha, which is the next generation after Gen Z, will be even more in tune. So I actually think leadership certainly is going to come from the people on this panel and yourself, but it's going to come even more from the younger generation as we move through this. And they're going to come up with new ideas, innovation, everything that we need to move us forward. I'm a true believer that what's going to get us to 1.5 degrees going forward has to be innovation. We have to have better technologies across the board if we're going to get there.
Tony, any comments from you?
Yeah, I learned a lesson when I worked in the newspaper business. It's a sort of business strategy lesson, but it's true for this agenda, which is that when the future is destroying the present, the answer is never to protect the present. It's always to run to the future. You know, I remember in the newspaper business, we were talking about, you know, let's fight off this digital thing and let's keep newspapers alive and keep people... It was, of course, the wrong answer. And I feel that way about net zero. And I feel it about political leadership, and I feel it about business leadership, right? Why are you doing this, Lakshman, at Reckitt, right? Probably the revenue streams from being a much more green business are small compared to the existing and legacy revenue streams. For now. But what you are confronted with a future that's destroying the present, and you are choosing not to protect the present, but to race to the future. And I do think that that's the leadership lesson of net zero, which is we all know enough about it now to know that it is our future. So anybody that's still hanging on to the present loses in the end. I just think that's the lesson of history. It's certainly an elementary business school lesson. And I just would urge that of everybody, our political leaders and our business leaders in the room.
I'm going to give the final voice to Andrew, but before I did that, Virginia, any closing comments from you as you
Well, I
reflect
think
on the panel?
leadership is extraordinarily important, and political leadership is really difficult. We haven't talked about social media, but the misinformation, the destruction, the suspicion is something that people have to learn to live with. I believe very strongly that it's important for business leaders to come back into the front line. When we have the debate here about Brexit, a lot of business leaders said, politics has nothing to do with me. I don't want to know about anything about this. But the fact is, we're in this world together, and business leaders do have a really important part to play. And most particularly, this whole debate, are you a citizen of the world or are you a citizen of a city? People want to have a sense of identity. And there's a sort of sense that a lot of business leaders have been too remote, which is why, again, Laxman, I'm so impressed that you have so invested personally in being a known face in Hull. Because a lot of your predecessors would have said, well, you know, I was born in India, I've lived in the States, I'm very busy in London, I can't be bothered to come to Hull. But I feel that a visible leadership is really quite important if we're going to maintain stable democracies in all our countries in turbulent times, because we're optimistic here at COP26, but we know there are going to be floods, famine, fires, turbulence. And strong, courageous, steadfast political leadership is going to be really important.
Well, thank you for that. It's been obviously a very highly interactive panel. I want to appreciate all the input. This government has done an amazing job in setting a big vision. And frankly, you'll see the progress the government is making in corralling a whole range of people in order to get to that. You're clearly at the center of that, particularly with business. Any closing reflections as you listen to this conversation, particularly about the role of place and cities in making it happen?
Yeah, it's, look, first of all, a huge amount of humility. We've got a great deal of knowledge and expertise on the panel. And if we can harness that, if we can go away today, and it's not just a moment in time because of this terrific concentration, but we can actually keep that bottled and use some of our discretionary time. Secondly, mayors are taking over the world. You will have noticed in the UK that we have a former mayor. As our Prime Minister gave great leadership to one city, is now giving great leadership and supporting a place-based revolution. So this couldn't be more pertinent than ever before. And then finally, amen to everything that Virginia said about leadership. And I think probably one of the things we should all be doing is drafting Laxman to come and help solve some of these really big challenges. Because where we do that, you know, we are harnessing that capability, that leadership. It doesn't matter who our leaders are, but it matters that they're brave, they're courageous, they've got a vision, and they're willing to lead us to that vision. So I think we're all here today because we have that vision. You very kindly convened this, and let's go and do what we've got to do to save our planet, city by city. Starting with wasn't it charming to hear about Freetown? Let's start with
Yes.
Freetown, Treetown hashtag.
Thank you. Well, I'll just close with this. 200 years ago, we started in Hull. And I know Philip Larkin's poetry sometimes can be a bit depressing, but the reality is we have a town that's basically survived 200 years and has had a great history. We're looking forward to the next 200. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your input. And we really hope that what we can do here is revolutionize, as you said, the second great revolution for this country in its cities. So thank you again.